Hi, how's everyone doing tonight?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to see you all here and happy to talk to you guys and learn more about what you're doing and share my experiences. So how to make data-informed product decisions. So first I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you think that your company is already good at making evidence-based product decisions? Show of hands. All right, we've got a few like maybe. Lukewarm. All right. So let's see if we can talk about how we can make this better. I believe that the best products are made when the risky decisions, whether it's what story to put in the backlog or your high-level strategy, are backed by data. And many of us are already aware. These tech giants tell stories about their data-informed product decisions. We go out and we read about all the things Airbnb is doing to scale knowledge sharing and building a data university. We hear about what's happening at Facebook and, of course, Amazon, and their 11.6 seconds between every code release. But we don't all work in that environment, right? Some of us work at companies where maybe the managers aren't quite so focused on data. Or maybe we're just at a smaller company and we don't have access to those resources. So what does this look like and what is really happening? Well, I want to remind you that even the big guys make mistakes. So I don't know if any of you have ever owned a Fire phone? Do you guys remember the Fire phone? Yeah, so this is really an epic story, right? The Fire phone is a case where Jeff Bezos was asking his team to build this, and if you go and read some of the things that people said afterwards, a lot of them said, well, some of us started to think maybe this wasn't going to be a good idea, but we couldn't convince Jeff of that, and so we built it. And because Jeff Bezos runs an amazing and huge company, he's able to say, all of that inventory we wrote off, it's all learning. We learned, it's great, we're going to move on, we need to take risks and do things. And that's fantastic. That's great that he can do that. But what I like to think about is if you were in the shoes of the people on his team, what would you do? So making evidence-based product decisions is hard, even at a place like Amazon, and definitely at the places that most of us work at. I want to tell you guys a story. So one of the companies that I've worked with is a retail company, and they have had the benefit of a lot of customers and a lot of reach and a lot of experience doing what they do. When I went to work with them, we were looking at what can we do to help this grow, and how can we make sure that as the world changes around us, this company stays relevant and this work stays relevant. So I went off with their team and I started doing analysis. We looked at the data, we looked at the customers, we talked to the people on the sales floor, tried to really get a sense of what's going on, and we came back and we said, here are the pain points that your customers have. This is what they're telling us. And if we could solve this with technology, we think they would really love this. And here's why this is better than what else is going on in the marketplace. What do you guys think happened? Do you think they followed that advice? No, probably not, right? Well, we tried to bring the data and the information needed to make good decisions to them. And we told them who we were talking to and what those people were saying, and we brought real stories. And these are the things that a lot of the leaders tell us, right? You go to Marty Kagan's workshop or you talk to Jeff Patton and they tell you, talk to customers, do these things. And many of us get really excited, really jazzed, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to build the right thing. But sometimes there's somebody in the way. Sometimes there are people who have a lot of ego. Sometimes there are people that have shiny object syndrome. And sometimes you'll talk to people and they'll say, you know what, I really want to do the thing that just looks really cool because I want it to be a stage. This is something, I don't know if you guys have heard of Tendai Vicky, but he called it innovation theater. So it's not about growing the bottom line for the business. It's about doing the innovative thing that makes us look cool because we just want to look cool, right? Or doing the new thing for the press release. So being able to say, we just launched a crypto product. those are all things that, that I've come across, and I imagine some of you guys have come across, and they get in the way. Sometimes you get this. This is me too. I'm going to build a thing just like those people, and somehow I'm going to do it better, and I'm going to beat them. That really rarely works. You also get the sales team said, this is what I need. So build this thing for the sales team, and you know, trust that they know what the customers want. Another thing I've seen a lot is marketing driven. So maybe the marketing team is saying, this is what I see in the market, this is what I hear, but a lot of times they're using older techniques. So they're doing things that they learned in business school, or that they learned, you know, growing up in a company that was not a tech company, and those techniques were pretty awesome in the 20th century. But today you have to blend that with personalized, data-driven understanding. Another thing is the customer who tells you this is what I want, and you come away from a customer interview and the customer says, yes, I would buy that if you built it. And then sometimes you go and build it and then they don't buy it. And then you're like, but I talk to customers! So why does this happen? Well, one of the reasons this happens is that I love to point to Richard Feynman. He's well known for writing about the scientific process. And he says the first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. So sometimes, you know, you go into an interview and you talk to a customer and you come away thinking that they love what you just put in front of them. You're biased to want to believe that. And they're biased to tell you something nice. Because they're human and you're human. And if you just did this customer interview in person, even if you did it over the phone, you know, there's some human element, and they want to be nice. And they're not doing it to trick you, but they have cognitive biases. So making evidence-based product decisions is hard. I want to make it easier. So I've been practicing this for many years. So a little bit about my background and where I come to from this. So I went to Columbia Engineering. I studied chemical engineering. And I did that because I thought I could apply my understanding of systems to build products that would make the world a better place. And I was super excited about it. I graduated from school and wasn't quite like that. So I started to work in industry, and I saw the day-to-day life of somebody who's working in something where you're building physical products or you need big plants. It's a lot slower and not so exciting. I was at Columbia when Facebook was launched to the college campuses. So I watched the rise of the digital social media networks. I watched it compete. It came to my campus. We had a competitor on campus, was watching all of that, and I was like, this stuff is amazing. It's transforming everything. So when I finished school, I tried to do chemical engineering for a little while anyways, because I'd put so much into it. You know, the sunk cost fallacy, right? You're like, I've done this, I'm going to keep doing this. But I also was involved in a tech startup, and I came out in the New York City tech scene, and I started seeing all the energy and how excited people were and how much change they were making. And I was like, wow, those people are, like, they're going to do something. I'm going to join them. So for the first 5 years, I was in some really small startups. One was one that actually my husband founded, and I joined him and started helping with that. Then I went to another startup where I was person number 4, and we grew to 7 people. We built them a platform, and then I said, you know, I think I'm going to go work at a bigger company. So I went to Media Math, which was 140 people at the time, which to me was like a huge company. No longer seems that way, but it was 140 people. So I spent time at Media Math, was there for 3 years. I went to Shutterstock. Those are both high-growth companies, so kind of going from 100 to 1,000 people. And I don't know, have any of you ever worked at a company that's scaling where they're adding like 25 people a month? It's crazy, right? Like, everything is changing around you. And my favorite article about this is this article where somebody writes, let go of your Legos. It was on First Round Review, and it was about how you have to give away all of your Legos. Like, don't hold on to what you know, because there's so much opportunity around you. Teach the other people how to do it and move on to the next thing that you can learn how to do. So that was a transformative experience getting to work there. And since then, I've gone on to help several companies, including Weight Watchers, Babies R Us, Plectica, and the Lean Startup Company. And some startups that I'm working with that haven't picked their name yet, so really early stage. And I like to apply all this to help everybody that I talk to figure out how to build great products. So mostly I kick off new products like Shutterstock Editor, and this is Plectica. It's a knowledge mapping software. But sometimes I kill products. Zombies, sometimes we call them. So in the case of Skillfeed, we said, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this. Let's put our resources elsewhere. I've seen firsthand a lot of times you get started on a project and you're excited about it, you think it's a dream, and then you start to learn more and you realize this is not the dream. So when that happens, what do you do? How do you make evidence-based decisions even in the face of that? So I have several frameworks that I like to go to for this. So the very first thing, the number one thing, is look at what does success mean for the project that you're on. Think about it from the mindset of the key decision maker. So many of us are familiar with empathy maps. Do an empathy map for the decision maker. Like literally sit down and say, what are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they thinking? What are their pains? What are their gains? What makes your boss look good to your boss's boss? That's the stuff that's going to help you convince them to follow your advice, provided your advice is good. So that's also part of it. But really think about what success looks like, not just for you, but for the other people above you and the people above them. And then start thinking about, well, what do you want to convince them? So let's say that you want to convince them of a fantastic product strategy that's going to lead you to product growth. How do you figure out what that is? Start with what you think you know. So start with mapping out what your picture of the situation is. I like to do this with the team that's involved. I like to bring stakeholders into the room and do a session where we map out together, who do we think the customer is? What do we think we know about them? What do we think is their context and their empathy map? What's their job? What are their pains and what are their gains? So start with that. Start with what makes the customer really excited. And if you're in a B2C company, that's simple to say, it's the customer. If you're in a B2B company, it gets a little more complex. You have to do this for both the client and the end user. If it's a B2B2C or there's some end user who has to do something. So, for example, at MediaMath, we had to think about both the chief marketing officer who might have signed the master services agreement and the marketing manager who would run the campaigns. Because at the end of the day, if the chief marketing officer signs the master services agreement, but the marketer puts the campaigns in the other system because yours is too complicated to use, you're still going to lose the money or leave some money on the table. So you do have to map it out for whatever segments meet your particular situation. And then most importantly, find their pains. What makes them scratch their heads and say, that's so frustrating. My favorite way to do this is through customer interviews. I feel like you just can't empathize with your users if you're not meeting them. You can get to a point where you need to figure out the market size, and we'll talk about that. But to start with, you have to talk to some real people. You got to figure out what they're saying. And my general rule of thumb is you're going to talk to people until you're hearing the same things. And if you talk to, say you got to 7 to 10 people, and you were hearing the same things after all 7, you were hearing different things from those 10 people, that tells you that your strategy is not focused enough, and you need to figure out more what segment you should be talking to. So if you talk to 10 different people and they're all telling you 10 different things, well, you're trying to solve everybody's problems and you're going to solve nobody's problems very well. But if you have a nice tight market segment, then 7 to 10 people is enough for you to get a consistent message. And then once you start to hear what their pains are, you want to explore it at the market level. So now you want to say, cool, I interviewed 3 people who had these user pains and 5 people who had these user pains. Are they representative of what's going on out in the world? Or did I just talk to some weirdos who were really unique? So you want to try to quantify that. And then from there, you want to hone in and say, okay, now I have a better picture of who these people are, what their pains are, what their gains are, and how big their market is, how many people are like them. And of course, depending on what you're trying to achieve, whether they're likely to act on it, how much money they would spend, how much time they would give you, how much of their precious energy they would put into what you're trying to do. So then you can kind of triangulate all of that and say, here is the segment that we need to start with. This is the place where these people are the most likely to move on the thing that I'm offering. And get really tight about that to start. Tell people on your team and around you that come up and say, well, what about, you know, this person who maybe could be excited about our product but like needs these other things. Tell them that's cool. They're in the splash zone. We're not going to get them with this phase. We'll get them with a future phase, provided that phase 1 goes great. But we have to create a product that these people are going to love first. And then another thing to consider while you're doing that is, what is your unfair advantage? So again, back to that sort of Me Too thing, you don't want to just be looking at it and saying, hey, we're going to build that cryptocurrency thing that everyone else is doing, unless you have an unfair reason that you're the great person to do that. Your team is awesome at that, or you have the inroads into some industry. Figure out what your advantage is, figure out where you can leverage that, and play that up as strong as you can. So at this point in time, you'll have looked at who the users are, you'll have looked at what the market is. Now you're going to look at the actual offering. What are you going to sell them, and is it any good? So I always start with the user experience. What is this actual flow like? What is the experience like of interacting with this product or even this service? But once you start to get a feel for that, you want to look at the data. So you want to get a sense of, you know, basically everything that you can get your hands on, you want to understand. One of the ways that I like to do this is to start by thinking about what I wish I knew before I go into the numbers. Because sometimes I'll work with teams that like to just kind of endlessly dive through data, and they'll come back and be like, oh, I learned this thing, or isn't that interesting? And sometimes it is really interesting, and other times it's not relevant for the strategy we're trying to drive. So I'll give you an example. So let's see. I guess I could tell you for Shutterstock Editor, we were looking to launch to non-professional creators. So, you know, professional creators, they're fairly happy with the tools they have today. I mean, you can find complaints, but more or less they're there. But if you're trying to service somebody who is like running, say, a massage parlor or you know, a local business, and they're just trying to get their marketing done, but that's not their joy, they're not passionate about this, then you need to sort of figure out where their pains are. And what we did here is we started to look at, can we figure out which of the people who are coming to our site fall into this camp? What kind of things can we put in place? Like, I wish I knew of all the downloads that we have on Shutterstock, how many of them were going to, you know, a actual physical flyer versus a display ad versus a PowerPoint presentation. So we said, okay, well, let's go find out. So that wasn't something that was in the data at the time, but we put in things that would help us track that and find out what people were doing in the moment. So sometimes you have to kind of ask the question first, and then you can get the data for it. I mean, other times, you know, we have lots of people there who were continuously optimizing the conversion funnel, and, you know, looking at the data on the pricing and the data on who goes from free to paid and how long they stay and all of that. And so you need to know all of that too. But if you're trying to build something new, sometimes you got to come up with some other questions as well. And then finally, once you've kind of got a sense, okay, this is what I think I want to do with my product, this is how well it's working, this is where it's weak, you know, we're losing a lot of people in this step of the funnel, or we have a lot of people who, you know, need this thing, then you can start to evaluate the feasibility. So this is one of the things that I love to talk about. When I go and work with people who didn't come from a product background or didn't grow up in the tech world, a lot of times they have a lot of skills at analyzing opportunities and developing strategies, but it doesn't connect to the feasibility. So they won't be able to tell you this thing is something that the engineers could build you in a quarter, and that thing is going to take them 3 years. They kind of just don't know. So if you're a product manager, this is one of your secret sauce elements, right? This is a place where you have a core skill. You can say, hey, wait a minute, I can help you figure that out. And so you want to start with talking to your engineers. A lot of times, depending on how early stage or what kind of you know, idea you're working through, you might start with the leader of a team or a manager. And once you get to a point where, you know, it's ready, you start to talk to the whole team and get a sense of what are the possibilities. And you want to make sure that what you're really communicating to them is not, here's the idea that I want to build and you tell me how much it would take. You want to say, here's the vision that I'm selling. These are the problems we want to solve. I was thinking maybe we could solve it with this, but if you have other ideas because you understand this technology really well, let's all do it together. So you want to have that conversation. And one thing that I want to share here is I've often worked with teams that aren't used to working in this way, and one of the things that will happen is the engineers will say to me, well, just tell me what you want me to build. And so one thing that I try to do to help them break free of that thinking is say, well, what if this was a blank check? So if we're on an initiative where the company is actually really excited about this, it's a new strategy for the company, and they're ready to invest, they want to know what is the best we could do with the resources that we have access to, whether it's our existing team or a team that we could buy or build. And then sometimes a good way to bring your team into thinking that way is to say, let's imagine we have a blank check. If you had a blank check, what would you do? Who would you hire to do this? What kind of skills would you be looking for? Throw out what we've got today and think about it that way. And that can help you kind of break through from that box of what we've been optimizing together for however much time you've been working with them. So I like to summarize this as oomph. So the way that you assess this is you look at the users, the market, the product, and the feasibility. So cover all those bases, and you'll come away with that with a solid plan. And then you have to convince the other people. And remember not to convince yourself. So we're back at Richard Feynman again. And he says, a scientist is never certain. We absolutely must leave room for doubt, or there's no progress and there's no learning. So all the great plans in the world, not going to work when things change around us all the time. And even if you're a fantastic planner, the world is changing really fast these days. If nothing else, your customers are talking to each other on social media at a super fast speed, and so things just multiply like crazy. So you still have to be ready to change your plan. So one of my favorite tricks for how to help the whole team get comfortable with that, and especially the leaders and the decision makers, is to talk about the risks up front. So we talk about the risks, and then we map out what are the pains, what are the things that we think could make this go wrong, and then we can say, hey, you know what, I think we should do some research. And that's often a good way to get those leaders to buy into the fact that you should do some research and not just execute the plan, because now they're thinking in terms of some of these major things that could go wrong. So once you start to map out, oh, you know what, let's all kind of prioritize and agree that, you know, the number one thing that could go wrong is, like, we made a leap of faith assumption that, I don't know, something was going to, like, cryptocurrency was going to last for a long time. I don't know why I'm on cryptocurrency today. But, but we made this leap of faith assumption. Let's go test it, right? So then you can get some buy-in for qualitative research and quantitative research. And what do you need to figure out? Well, that's where you got to stop and say, well, before you go in to say, oh, I need to do user interviews, or I need to put a prototype out there, or I need to, you know, do an MVP and test it. Step back and say, what are the questions I want to solve for, and then design an experiment around it. So my rule of thumb around here is qualitative is going to give you the why and the how. You're going to ask questions, you're going to explore, you're going to look for deeper information and deeper insights. And quantitative is going to tell you how much and how many. So that's where you're going to get to really find out, okay, you know, how many other people are like that person, and gather data from larger groups. So once you combine that together, you can start to really see how you can de-risk the big risks that you talked about. So I like to say it's not enough to be right, you also have to be persuasive. So part of how you can do this is, this is my decision maker who doesn't care what you have to say. So he's looking at his pocket watch and he's like, you are challenging me, get out of my office. So what do you do when that's the guy? So the first place that I like to start is to invite stakeholder insights. You know, I did say earlier, do the empathy map. This is the first thing you do with them in person, because you don't empathy map in front of them. So you get a sense of who they are and what they want and what their pains are. And then you go and say, you know what, I need you to tell me directly, even if you've heard from everybody else. And you treat them like a partner. No matter what their background is, no matter what kind of approach they have to this, no matter how hard-headed they are, you say, you know what you have to tell me is really valuable, and I really want to hear it. Let's go through this together. There's a couple ways to do this. One-on-one conversations are great, but they can take a lot of time. So if you've got a small company, just do one-on-one conversations. Great, you're done. If you're at a big company, this could take you weeks. I have done that. And so sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you still just have to do the one-on-one conversations that are going to take you weeks because you just need to build that rapport, and that's how your company works. Other times you can get everyone into a room and you can do it together. or you can have them write out their ideas. So I like to use design thinking exercises to have people write them out, put them on the wall, and see each other's thoughts as well. In some companies, we send around documents. Not my favorite, but if you're at a company where that's the thing, you could start with that. And so from that, you get a sense of their insights, their questions, and what they're thinking. And then you go out to do research to either prove that wrong or prove that right. The next step is to share your results regularly. So I recommend you share at the same cadence that your engineering team shares what they've built. So a lot of teams already have a demo where they share, we built this. Some teams don't do that. Some teams meant to do that, and then they start having nobody show up, and then they stop doing it. And it's a really good thing to do. It gives everybody a chance to feel proud of what they've done. It gives everyone a chance to see what everyone else is doing. But you can jazz it up. As the product manager, if people were saying this was really technical and nobody wanted to hear, I've had a lot of like API engineers tell me, I don't have anything to demo. Nobody wants to see me write my code on the screen. And they'll be like, actually they do, but you have to explain why that's important. So that's when you can partner with them. As the product manager, you can say, great, you know what, we're going to do this together, and I'm going to explain what problem we were solving, and then you're going to show how, that API service you built solved the problem, and look how quickly it did. So I like to tie it all together. So you want to have them say what problem they were trying to solve and what they built to solve it. And then you want to say, what did we learn along the way? And with what we learned along the way, I like to do not just what we learned through customer development interviews or experience research, but you can also have them share things they learned through engineering spikes and architecture reviews, so they get excited about the infrastructure and the things they're building. Really anything like that you learn, you can share. And then the last piece is not just the results you got back, but also what you're planning and how what you're planning is changing. The reason why you want to do that is because you want to start training the decision makers around you to see this as a continuous process. So if you say, okay, this is what we were trying to solve for, this is what we built, this is what we learned from it, and you know what, we're changing our plan. Now we're going to tweak it this direction. And then the next 2 weeks later, you say, now we're going to tweak it in this direction. I've seen this work over time. Eventually, somebody who is very committed to their idea and just wants you to build it can build up trust in you as the person who's steering the ship, and start to believe that actually, you know what, you've got this under control, and you can make the decisions and you can guide it in that direction because you build up that trust over time in the increments with the whole team and the decision makers around you. So that's it. That's how to make data-informed product decisions. I'd love to know what you guys want to know more about. We've got time for Q&A, and I'm happy to connect with any of you guys online or answer more questions through email as well. So thank you guys. Yes?
I saw you said you did something with Portfolio School.
Yes.
I was actually just there.
Really?
Yeah, so what did you do there?
So Baber and I worked, so let's give a little context. So Portfolio School is a school here in the city that is trying to transform education through project-based learning. It's a small micro school, and I like to describe it as Montessori meets Maker Faire. So they've got 3D printers and laser cutting and things like that. The founder of Portfolio School worked with me at Shutterstock, and so I've been working with them to help them identify how they're going to grow and identify whether there's technology they can use to support what they're doing.
Yeah, because I was there, that was actually one of the first schools I went to, but I was just interested in that learning philosophy, and they're actually my favorite school in the space.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Like there's other schools like Spire and Avenues, and they're all great schools, but Portfolio to me that's the cool one. Like, Shear is great too. So you worked with Baber?
Yeah, Baber and I worked together at Shutterstock. He watched, we weren't on the same team, but he was the GM of video at Shutterstock, and then for a little while he was an interim leader of engineering. And while we were building the Shutterstock Editor team, he was the engineering lead for the whole company, the engineering lead. I've actually been helping them figure out who, so they've got a market of teachers, students, parents, and administrators. So this makes me really excited because it's the most complex system I get to work in. And I'm helping them figure out, education, it's a lot, yeah.
Have you been in a position where you've joined a team that's been there for a while, you're new to the team, you're the product manager? How do you end up getting their respect in terms of, you've got to do what I'm asking you to do, but then I'm in the system?
I mean, it's, I've recently heard someone say this phrase, show up consistently. So like you can't expect that to come on day one. You have to win them over. But I mean, that's, in some ways, every job I've had. I don't know. I can't think of a time when, well, no, that's not true. When I was in the really small companies with less than 10 people, then sometimes like I would be there first and I'd hire the engineers and they'd be like, cool, you hired me. But the companies that were 100 to 1,000 people, I'm always joining a team of people who've been there for a long time, or been there before me, and having to convince them. And it definitely, it doesn't happen overnight, but I know that people around me said, you know, I win them over because I speak their language. You know, try to speak everybody's language. If you're talking to an engineer, speak engineering. Think about what matters to them and what they feel good about. If you're talking to a designer, think about what matters to them. If you're talking to a business executive, think about what matters to them. I think that's one of the biggest things is speaking everybody's language can really build trust, because a lot of times engineers have trouble when they think the product manager doesn't, you have to earn their respect. Yeah.
Two questions actually. Being a product manager, I've always faced this point. What's the best way to build a driver and MVP? And at the same time, you said about product vision. What are the best ways to do that? You can do that through PowerPoint presentations. You can do that. But when the essential job, of course, as you know, a PM connects the business, the technology, and the end users.
Yeah.
But so it's like in the Venn diagram, he's the connecting point, right?
Yes.
Or she.
Yeah.
But how do you sell the product vision? Like, what are the best ways? Because having been that, I have a certain perspective, but I want to understand the perspective of other product managers.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear yours too. From my perspective, so I think there were two main questions there. How do you sell the product vision, and what was the first one?
What's the best way to build and drive an MVP? An
MVPs, okay. So so I'm going to start with vision and then go to MVP. So for vision, I think, you know, similar to what I said, a lot of it is getting buy-in and hearing other people. It's really hard to convince people to buy into your vision if they think that it's your vision. If they think that it's our vision, then they're going to be more excited, right? So give them a chance to give you their feedback and a chance to have a voice. And the thing that I've talked to a lot of product people who, you know, I've come across many in my career who said, I don't want to talk to all those stakeholders because like there's just so many opinions and so many voices and it doesn't matter. I'm going to make the decision. And so we're not going to bother. Have any of you guys worked with anybody who did that? Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I always say that is very misguided. I think, sorry, I don't know if we'll turn this back on after, but I think that a good product manager can listen to everybody and then make a decision and say, you know, here are the reasons why we're going with this one. And the other things that you guys said were considered, we listened to it, but we're not acting on that, we're acting on this. One thing that always stands out in my mind is I read this Harvard Business Review article where they said like what decisions get the most buy-in, and that was the key thing was everybody feels like they had a say in the process. They're going to be a lot more likely to think it was a good decision even if it wasn't the thing they suggested. So I think that's the biggest piece is inviting other people to hear, and then the other thing is trying lots of different avenues and methods and being consistent with the way you share that vision. If you share the vision once and then 3 months go by and you never talk about it, people are going to forget. You might remember because you're living and breathing this, but they're going to forget. You kind of have to keep sharing it until you feel like, why am I still talking about this? Everyone else must know it by now. That's generally when people start to really have it sink in. And a lot of times we forget that, especially as product managers, is we talk with people from so many different parts of the organization, right? So, you know, we go and say something to marketing and we say something to sales and we say something to, you know, the engineers and we say something to the designers and we're like, oh my God, I just said the same thing 5 times today. But all of those people only heard it once. So you have to do it. And then on the MVP side, so I love I love that. I love talking about that. I think one thing I want to start with first, though, is that the term MVP has a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people. And so I think the question becomes, like the first thing is, what do you mean, like a test, or do you mean launching something, or tell me, what did you have in mind?
On two aspects. Before the product is right when the product is conceived, and once when the product is already made, it's in the prototyping stage just before the product demo. So in both cases.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the best practices to drive it.
To drive it, meaning like to guide what it's going to become? Yeah, so in that early stage, right, where you have a concept, but you don't have a product yet, at that point, the MVP's purpose that's more of what I think of as the lean startup version of it, where this is a test and we're using it to gain learning and to validate. And in that case, what you need to get built isn't necessarily it's not necessarily even a prototype or a concept of what you want to build. What it has to be is the thing that's going to help you learn the thing you most need to know. So if you do a risk assessment and you ask everybody, so my favorite way to do a risk assessment is to ask everyone in the room, let's imagine that it's a year from now. How did this project fail? So just like make it comfortable to talk about and say, I'm not trying to point to you and say, I think you forgot that risky thing and you forgot that risky thing. Like, let's just set the table and say, we're all going to talk about this. We're going to pretend that it's a year out and it failed. What do you think caused the failure? And so then when you get to that, you start to identify what are the riskiest assumptions that you have, and you want the MVP or the test or whatever kind of discovery work you're doing at that stage to be something that helps you gain learnings to make it less likely that you're wrong or that thing is going to happen. So sometimes that's a prototype, sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's a half-finished design where you're going to put it in front of a user and see what they tell you is missing. Sometimes it's, we think that we need these 5 things, but it's going to be so much faster to build just one of them. So what happens if I just build one? Yeah. And then once you're later on and you're talking about the actual release stage, at that stage, the best practice becomes something more about running a beta program, putting people on it ahead of time, and testing to see if they achieve the outcome that you wanted them to achieve. So if you set out your vision and you said, our vision is we're going to solve problem X for customer Y, and it's going to help them achieve outcome Z, then you say, okay, we've been building this product. Let's go put it in front of customers who meet that target and see if it solves that problem and helps them achieve that outcome. And then you can tell, is this ready for launch? Doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles, but if it achieves that outcome for a particular segment, great, you're ready to put an MVP out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So thank you for being here. So last year I did, this summer I actually did internship at Bank, right? Where I also worked on a similar product discovery process where I was actually helping them create a new revenue line, especially in the mortgage industry. So I actually went with the whole process of interviewing with the customers, understanding their pain point, and then build a market strategy of how to launch that product. The biggest pain point which I felt was hypothesis of validation. So now I have all the pain point. Now I know what all things I actually want my product to be solved. I now want to see whether the users want those things to be solved or not. So what are different avenues you should try to actually get your hypothesis validated? Like I used a survey on the website and I ran it for a 2 week, got 200 to 400 responses. Use that data to actually validate. But is that data enough, or is there any other way you can validate those hypotheses?
Yeah. Well, there are so many ways. So that's one way, right? I think it depends a lot on what is the risky part of the hypothesis. But if what you're trying to do is figure out, do they really want, I generally break it down into, do they have the problem we're solving, and does the solution we're offering solve the problem? So you can kind of stage that into 2 stages of research, right? So your first stage is, let's see if they really have this problem, and is this problem really painful to them? You can do that through surveys. It depends on how you structure the survey. My favorite way is to start with user interviews, talk to customers and see if they have this problem, or go and observe them in the wild, depending on what kind of product you're working on. And then once you've had enough of those, you can figure out what are the valuable things to put in a survey. So you could say, okay, customers told me, I watched a bunch of customers who were feeling all this pain around Well, whatever the financial thing.
Mortgage industry.
Yeah.
Digitalization.
Okay. So, so I talked to a bunch of customers who are feeling this pain. Now I want to see if other customers feel that too. You can create a survey that says it in the same words that you heard from real customers. What you want to avoid is surveys that are too hypothetical or too aspirational. So I always get really frustrated. This often happens with like traditional market insights. Someone will send me a report and it'll be like, 70% of users said that if they had this, they would use it. And I'm like, 70% of people say they want to go to the gym tomorrow, but do they go to the gym tomorrow? No. So, that's not very helpful. But if you get into the detail, the last 3 times you went to the gym, what was on your mind? Or tell me, usually you start with the interviews and you say, tell me a story. Tell me a real concrete thing. Don't speak in hypotheticals. Don't speak in generalities. Tell me specifics. This morning, when you picked up your phone, what was the first thing you did with it? The last time that you had a conversation with a friend, what did you use? Tell me about that. What software was it? Why were you on Facebook Messenger? Why were you on Slack? Get into the specific stories, and then you can start to validate whether they have the problems you think they have, whether they have the context that you think they have, and that'll help you with that part. And then once you get to, okay, great, we know enough of them have the problem, we want to see if this solution works, then you need to create a screening process where you're screening that they have the problem, and then you bring them in to say, cool, let's test out this solution.
Thank you.